Here's what happened, guys. The Founder movie came out in 2016 telling the story of the behemoth business McDonald's, where Ray Kroc bought the business from McDonald's brothers back in 1961, which, by the way, a lot of questionable things happened in that decade of the 1960s. But in this movie, when the McDonald's brothers signed their name and business away, they agreed to a supposed handshake deal with Ray Kroc for supposedly 1% of ongoing revenue from the business. Today, that 1% would be worth a lot of money. But Ray Kroc never honored that supposed handshake deal. In business, these type of behemoth businesses are celebrated because of how big they are. I mean, who doesn't know the name McDonald's? And how many jobs these businesses create, how much money they're able to take in for the business, and how much they've given back to the communities. And I have no issue with billionaires. It's just we should want to know as a society how they made their money, because who we've idolized in business can be terrible examples of how to live your life with internal peace and stability. And it's important to remember that business is just one part of your life as a small business owner. The status quo, it isn't working for the majority of Americans right now. We need a society focused back on long-term principles rather than short-term deception for a future, to be able to have a future of more handshake business deals. Welcome back to the Already Week show, and happy Monday, guys. I'm going to share with you my screen of Ray Kroc's Wikipedia page here. Bear with me for the patience. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the show and leave a comment. It helps get the word out about the show and helps me to hire a producer faster as more people are able to come in and be aware of this show. So let me get this up for you guys. Okay. So here we go. Here is Ray Kroc's bio. So even the first line reading it was an American businessman who was instrumental in turning McDonald's into the most successful global fast food corporation by revenue. And he purchased the brand from the McDonald brothers in 1961 after several years as their franchising agent, and served as leader of the company until his death. So to go back to that line, the most successful, and it was based off of revenue. And so we got to continue to ask ourselves as small business owners, how do we define success? And for me, I come back to success as being able to steward a business for decades, in that you can then eventually pass on to your kids or your grandkids. And you're doing it by living it with principles, rather than just constantly chasing the money, because your business reputation isn't worth damaging your soul. One of the big lies we've been told is that this is just it. This is our one life and that's it. But we do have an eternal soul. Coming back to my faith in Catholicism, it's important for us never to forget our eternal soul and to always do what is right over what is easy and convenient. That wins every single time. And we all fall short to the glory of God. And so we are not perfect in our actions, and it's important to own up to those mistakes. I made mistakes of going the easy and convenient route when it came to the first conference I hosted, social media conference, where I lied a lot to my team, lied to the community, and then I had to take that on for responsibility and own that and decide that honesty is going to be how I do business now moving forward, and holding to that principle. So we do make those mistakes, but we've got to atone for those mistakes and move forward and continue to show up better the next time, and go back to these important principles, thinking back to these cardinal virtues that I want to share with you. And I go even before going into that, I want to talk about the Plato's allegory of the cave, because in business, there is a lot of idolizing these big corporations, globalist corporations. But what we have to continue to ask ourselves is, has that actually really helped to improve the quality of life of Americans over these last 2 decades? Or are we spiraling down a path of destruction for our country? And signs point to that happening. You think of how Gen Z is the most in-debt generation for their age group in the history of the U.S. The depression crisis that we have, obesity crisis, the amount of loneliness that is out there. And this is a major problem. These are major problems that we have to address in our country, and that show that the status quo isn't working. And so to idolize these big globalist corporations, that's not where we have to go moving forward into the future, is continuing to do that, but instead being able to make sure that we are coming back to celebrating principles in how we do business. And those principles go back to these moral virtues. But the problem is we've been under this spell for so long of how we're supposed to do business. It's to win at all costs, to destroy the competition. That's messaging that is out there. And we're noticing the shift and the change in this of making sure that we're celebrating the success of others, but there's still that undertone of these sins, like one of which that I think about is the resentment that can build when we see others winning, but we feel like we're not winning. Or the greed to try to get the best deal possible at the expense of others. And these we have to reject in this movement of small business owners and this movement to turn America's future into a small business renaissance. Because if we get back to these important principles and hold to these principles, we can start to awake a lot more people awake a lot more Americans across our country to the importance of principles that have gotten lost. And so with the allegory, Plato's allegory of the cave, what it is where it's a story where there was a time where prisoners were raised in these caves, and they were chained in this cave. And then they were looking at this wall in front of them where there was light behind them that was able to shine on this wall. And they were thinking that these shadows was reality and the world that they lived in. But then at some point, one of the prisoners was forced out and freed and was able to get out of the cave and see the world around them. And that overwhelming feeling can happen when we start to wake up and realize how we've been living our life is not actually the best way to live our life, and to see the world for actually what it is, and to notice that our reality, we didn't have all the answers, we didn't know it all, and actually we're realizing we're just one small part of this bigger world. And to see all of that, it can be overwhelming. And then that prisoner felt an obligation to go back and let his other fellow prisoners know about the world that's out there that they aren't seeing. And so this is where, we have these spells in our society that are placed on us of, oh, you got to continue to chase the money and constantly focus on the love of money, which, again, going back to the Bible, love of money is the root of all evil. We need money, absolutely, for our basic needs, but we don't have to then love money. And it's an important distinction there. But then the prisoner came back, stumbling back in the dark to try to reach his fellow prisoners. And when the other prisoners saw him stumbling, they thought that it was so scary out there in the world outside of this cave. And so they wouldn't really listen to what the prisoner had to say, even though the prisoner was trying to tell them the truth of what the world was like. And that can happen where we share the truth of, okay, how we should move forward in making sure that we are having internal peace of focusing back on these moral virtues. And at times it can get ignored because of the anxiety and the stress that we have in operating in our day-to-day operations as a business owner, as a small business owner. And so therefore we don't want to actually do the really hard work of holding to our principles. Instead, we go the easy and convenient route. And that goes back to doing what is right over what is easy and convenient wins every time in the long term. At some point, it's going to catch up to you. And this is a reminder with this story of the allegory of the cave. And so let me share with you these important moral virtues that we've got to get back to celebrating in our society and pushing forward in small businesses and our industries, business industries, over 1,000 industries here in the U.S. So again, bear with me for the patience here, guys. Okay. So I have here... so the first ones, let me go up to, so these are the sins and then the opposing virtue. But then for the 4 cardinal virtues to remember, you have prudence, wisdom, justice, fairness, fortitude, courage, temperance, self-control. Those four, going back to wisdom, fairness, courage, self-control. Those are so important as you go into the unknown as a small business owner, as you're facing these challenges. If we can figure out ways to continue to bring timeless wisdom back into our society, it helps us in the long term. Fairness, making sure that we're treating others equally. Courage to step into that unknown, and self-control. At times, it can feel so very overwhelming out there for our emotions, and being able to control those really can help us in the long term. So, getting into then the sins, some that I want to highlight that have been celebrated is specifically you have pride is one of those that can be celebrated of thinking this pride that it's based off of my own abilities. But then we have to go to humility as the virtue here of realizing that there is one true God, and that God is Jesus Christ, and to realize that we are just one small part of this bigger world. And that can help to minimize the challenges that we're dealing with and not making them seem so overwhelming. And we can get a better idea of how to move forward with those challenges. Another one is greed, realizing that money isn't everything. Money, the love of money is the root of all evil. Does not mean you're still not needing money, but it's like you're not as attached to it. And you're able to let it flow in and out. And that's where generosity is the opposing virtue. And then the other one is envy that I talked about before, resentment, how we can have this resentment that builds of seeing others succeed, but then we're still stuck in our status quo and feel like things aren't working out. Well, this is where we have to have gratitude of the suffering, realizing that through our suffering, we're able to realize we can persevere. And from there's amazing gifts of endurance that can come from persevering in that suffering that you may be experiencing right now as a small business owner where things aren't working out. And the last one is sloth. There has been a big push for sloth of like being a bit owner rather than an operator, of how can you do less and less work for more and more rewards. And that could have had good intentions for the people that were trying to deliver it, but in the end, what that leads to is this is going back to this sin of sloth, where it's chasing the wrong path of realizing that you don't have to try to figure out the shortcut as fast as you can to work less, and ultimately chasing those shortcuts is going to cause a lot more chaos in your life, in the world, when more and more people are trying to chase the shortcut. And in the end, it's not if, but when you're going to get burned in business, if that's for a business deal or buying a product or service that has false advertising. In those moments, we aren't able to take the time to logically think through, is this really going to help me in the long term? But instead, we try to chase the quick fix for our challenges. And so this is where diligence is really important. The careful attention to duties, to persevere through our hard work, and to realize that there is gifts in the suffering of moving forward through it. And it does not mean that the suffering, that it does not mean that where we're at currently is going to be our permanent reality, but through the hard work, we can notice the gifts. And then we can make sure that we're keeping our soul intact through this whole entire process. So as small business owners, we cannot forget about these important virtues and these cardinal virtues and moral virtues to hold on to as we're continuing to do business, and to not to really steal our minds to all of these shortcuts that are out there that have these demonic undertones to them that can really hurt us in the long term. And I've experienced that in my own business journey since starting my first business over 11 years ago as a DJ. And so it's something that I don't want small business owners to have to deal with. And a lot of times we're just not aware of what's going on for the messaging that is out there and what we think success is supposed to be like as a business of building this empire. It doesn't have to be like that. And how we've seen it over the last few decades is that it actually can really hurt the quality of life of the majority of Americans. And we've got to figure out ways to continue to raise the overall quality of life of Americans so that we can live in a more peaceful society as well, where we can disagree with each other and still live in the same society, where we don't get to this massive amount of chaos that we can be feeling right now in our country and in our specific industry. So if you are a business owner who wants to connect with other business owners in person to shape the future of this of the economy and the future of our country, you can join us for A Future Fest. This is where you can register, is afuturefest.com. Really excited to be able, the plans to have over 300 small business owners across industries coming for this event. Excited to already have multiple states represented at this conference. And when you can get different perspectives across industries on your specific challenges that you're dealing with, you can then figure out the best way to move forward and be prepared for the chaos, not just present, but the future chaos. And that can create stability, not just in the business, but then in your life. And the antidote of chaos is stability. And we can't forget that as small business owners. So I'm excited for that event. And then tomorrow's my birthday. So going to be off tomorrow, and then excited to see you guys back here on Wednesday.